Billionaire pretended to be homeless. What the waitress did changed everything. Rachel's hands trembled as she approached the corner booth where the homeless man sat, hunched over, his weathered coat torn at the sleeves. The diner's fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across his unshaven face, and she could see the other customers turning away in disgust. Her manager, Tony, had already made it clear. Serve him water and move him along. No loitering. But something in the stranger's eyes stopped her cold. They weren't the vacant stare she'd grown accustomed to seeing on the streets. These eyes held depth, intelligence, and a profound sadness that seemed to pierce straight through her. "Coffee," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the diner's chatter. He looked up, surprised. I don't have money for coffee." Rachel glanced toward the kitchen where Tony was glowering at them both. She had exactly $37 in her purse, her rent money for the week. Her daughter Lily needed new shoes, and the electricity bill was overdue again. But looking at this man's hollow cheeks and the way his hands shook from cold, she made a choice that would change everything. "It's on the house," she said, pouring steaming coffee into a clean mug. The man's name was Andrew, or so he told her. As she refilled his cup for the third time, he studied her with curious intensity. Rachel Carter had been working double shifts at Murphy's Diner for 8 months now, ever since her husband left her with nothing but debt and a 4-year-old daughter to raise alone. The bags under her eyes told the story of sleepless nights spent worrying about bills. But her smile, genuine and warm, never wavered when serving customers. "You didn't have to do that," Andrew said quietly as she set down a plate of eggs and toast she'd paid for herself. "Everyone deserves kindness," Rachel replied, wiping down the table next to his, "especially on days like these." Outside, rain pelted the windows of the small Queen's Diner. Rachel watched Andrew eat slowly, savoring each bite as if it were his last meal. She'd seen hunger before, real hunger, in her own reflection just months ago when the cupboards were bare and Lily asked why Mommy wasn't eating dinner. Tony's voice cut through her thoughts. "Carter, stop wasting time with the vagrant and get back to work." Heat flushed Rachel's cheeks, but Andrew's gentle hand on her wrist stopped her from turning away. "Thank you," he said, his voice carrying a weight that seemed disproportionate to a simple meal. "I won't forget this." She thought it ended there, but her kindness had already set something greater in motion. 3 days later, Rachel was rushing to her second job at the bookstore when she noticed the same man sitting on a bench outside. This time, he was clean-shaven, wearing simple jeans and a plain sweater, but those same penetrating eyes were unmistakable. He was reading a worn copy of Pride and Prejudice, her favorite novel. "Good book," she said, pausing despite being late. Andrew looked up, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Elizabeth Bennet reminds me of someone I recently met. Strong, compassionate, sees past appearances." Something fluttered in Rachel's chest, a feeling she'd forgotten existed since her divorce. "I should get to work." Rachel. The way he said her name made her turn back. "Would you like to get coffee sometime? Real coffee at a real cafe?" She studied his face, searching for any sign of pity or ulterior motive. But all she saw was genuine interest, the same gentle soul who had thanked her so profoundly for a simple meal. Her practical mind screamed warnings. She barely knew him, couldn't afford distractions, had Lily to think about. But her heart, dormant for so long, whispered something different. I don't really date," she admitted, clutching her worn purse tighter. "I mean, I can't afford fancy places, and I have a daughter, and there's a small cafe 2 blocks from here that serves the best apple cinnamon muffins in Queens." Andrew interrupted softly. "Nothing fancy, just good coffee and conversation." The vulnerability in his voice matched her own. Here was a man who understood struggle, who wouldn't judge her secondhand clothes or her cautious heart. Against every practical instinct, she found herself nodding. Sunday afternoon. After my shift at the bookstore, "I'll be there," Andrew promised, and something in his tone suggested he'd never meant anything more seriously in his life. She hesitated, torn between yearning and fear. "I don't know if I'm ready for this. Coffee," Andrew said gently. "Just coffee. No expectations." But even that simple coffee date felt dangerous. Rachel had spent months building walls around her heart, protecting herself and Lily from further disappointment. Yet something about Andrew's patient eyes made her want to be brave again. Their first meeting at the small cafe was awkward, tentative. Rachel kept her purse clutched in her lap, scanning the exit, her defenses high. She'd agreed to coffee, but every instinct screamed caution. "You don't have to stay," Andrew said gently, noting her discomfort. "I know this is complicated." Rachel almost left. Her hand was already on her purse strap when Andrew asked, "What's your daughter's favorite story?" The question was so unexpected, so genuinely interested, that Rachel found herself answering despite her wariness. As she spoke about Emma's love for fairy tales, something in Andrew's patient listening made her walls crack just slightly. "Why did you stop writing?" he asked, and Rachel found herself sharing more than she intended. Her abandoned dreams, her silly romantic stories about kindness changing everything. "Dreams are luxuries when you're counting quarters for groceries," she said, immediately regretting the admission. She was giving this stranger too much, too fast. But Andrew's reaction surprised her. Not pity, but genuine anger at the circumstances that had stolen her passions. "Maybe you just haven't found the right person to believe in your dreams with you." Still, Rachel kept her distance. When he brought small gifts over the following weeks, a book of poetry, a single flower, she accepted them cautiously, always searching for the catch. Trust was a luxury she couldn't afford, especially when inconsistencies kept surfacing. His expensive phone, his knowledge of art that went beyond someone living on the streets. "Who are you, really?" Rachel asked one evening as they walked along the East River, Lily asleep in her stroller. Andrew stopped walking. The city lights reflected in his dark eyes, and for a moment, Rachel saw something vulnerable and raw in his expression. "I'm someone who forgot what real kindness looked like until I met you." The weight of unspoken secrets pressed between them. Rachel sensed there were parts of Andrew's story he wasn't ready to share, just as she hadn't told him about the nights she cried herself to sleep, terrified of failing Emma, of never being enough. But somehow, in the space of their silence, understanding grew. "We all have our mysteries," Rachel said softly, adjusting Emma's blanket. "But I need to know, are you running from something? Someone?" Andrew's laugh was hollow. "In a way, yes. I'm running from a version of myself I didn't like very much." He touched her face gently, his thumb tracing her cheekbone. "You make me want to be better than I thought possible." The admission hung in the air between them, loaded with promise and possibility. Rachel felt her carefully constructed walls beginning to crumble. This man, whoever he really was, made her feel seen in a way she'd never experienced, not even in her marriage. He walked away quietly that night, but her face lingered in his mind, along with the weight of the secret he carried, and the growing certainty that he was falling irreversibly in love with a woman who might never forgive him for his deception. The next morning brought chaos to Rachel's world. Tony cornered her before her shift, his face red with rage. "The health inspector's coming today, and if we don't pass, we're done. That homeless guy you've been feeding, he's been scaring away customers. I see him in here again. You're fired." Rachel's heart sank. She couldn't afford to lose this job, but the thought of turning Andrew away felt like betraying everything she believed in. When he appeared at lunch rush, he faced an impossible choice. "I'm sorry," she whispered, approaching his table with shaking hands. "I can't serve you today. My boss, I need this job." Andrew nodded slowly, understanding flickering in his eyes. "Of course, I understand completely." But as he stood to leave, a well-dressed woman at the counter knocked over her purse, spilling its contents across the floor. Without hesitation, Andrew knelt to help her gather her belongings, his movements gentle and respectful. Rachel watched, her heart breaking as other customers whispered and pointed. That's when everything changed. The woman Andrew helped looked up at him with recognition dawning in her eyes. "Mr. Harrison?" she whispered, loud enough for nearby tables to hear. Andrew's face went pale. The diner fell silent except for the whispered repetition rippling through the crowd. "Harrison Industries, the missing billionaire." Rachel felt the world tilt beneath her feet. The homeless man she'd been feeding, the mysterious stranger she'd grown to care for, was Andrew Harrison, the reclusive CEO whose disappearance had dominated headlines for months. The man worth billions who had vanished after his father's death. "Rachel," Andrew said, his voice breaking as he turned toward her, ignoring the cell phones now recording their every move. "Please." But Tony was already storming over, his face purple with rage and embarrassment. "You!" He jabbed a finger at Rachel. "You knew? You've been harboring some rich boy playing dress-up while my diner suffers?" "I didn't know," Rachel whispered, but her words were lost in the chaos as more customers recognized Andrew, as whispers became shouts, as her quiet life exploded into a nightmare of unwanted attention. Andrew moved toward her, but Rachel stepped back, her hand instinctively reaching for Emma's stroller. "Don't," she said, her voice steady despite the tears. "Just don't." She walked out of the diner and didn't look back, even when Andrew called her name. That evening, as news vans circled her apartment building and reporters shouted questions through her door, Rachel sat on her couch with Lily sleeping in her lap. The story was everywhere. Missing billionaire CEO found living on streets of Queens. Homeless experiment exposed by Queen's Waitress. Andrew Harrison's secret life revealed. In the days that followed, Rachel avoided the diner altogether. The humiliation of the whispers, the sting of betrayal, and the headlines that wouldn't stop replaying the story weighed heavily on her. She kept her head down, focusing on Emma, but each night she replayed their conversations, wondering if any of it had been real. Nearly 2 weeks later, after the media storm finally began to quiet, a gentle knock came at her apartment door. When Rachel opened it, Andrew stood there, no disguise, no mystery, caught between two worlds in an expensive suit that somehow made him look more vulnerable than his tattered coat ever had. "Before you say anything," he said quietly, "I need you to know that everything between us was real. The feelings, the connection, none of that was part of any experiment." Rachel let him enter, her heart breaking with every step. Lily looked up from her blocks and smiled sleepily. "Andrew, are you staying for bedtime stories?" The innocence in her daughter's voice nearly undid Rachel completely. How could she explain that the man Lily had grown to love, who had fixed her broken toy and taught her to tie her shoes, was someone they could never really have? After Lily was asleep, Andrew and Rachel sat across from each other in her tiny living room, the weight of his deception between them like a chasm. "Tell me why," Rachel said simply. Andrew's hands shook as he spoke. "After my father died, I inherited everything but felt empty. I needed to understand what real kindness looked like, and you showed me that first day in the diner. So I was your experiment." "You were never an experiment," Andrew said fiercely. "What happened between us? That was real. I fell in love with you, Rachel. Not the waitress, not the struggling single mother, but you. Your strength, your heart, the way you see people. Rachel closed her eyes. You watched me worry about rent while you could have bought the building. You let me choose between groceries and Emma's shoes while you have billions. Because changing your circumstances would have changed who you are, Andrew said softly. And who you are is why I love you. Silence stretched between them, filled with all the words they'd never said and the future that seemed impossible now. I don't know if I can do this, Rachel whispered, her voice breaking. Trust doesn't come back just because you explain it away. You made me feel crazy for questioning things that didn't add up. You watched me count change for groceries, while you could have solved everything with a phone call. I know, Andrew said simply. I know I hurt you, and I know sorry isn't enough. Rachel wiped her eyes, looking at this man who had become so important to her, so impossible to understand. I fell in love with someone who doesn't really exist. The Andrew I knew was kind and struggling and real, but you're a stranger with his face. The kindness was real, Andrew said quietly. The feelings were real. Everything else, yes, I lied about everything else, but not about caring for you. Never about that. Finally, Rachel spoke. What happens now? Andrew reached into his jacket and pulled out a single envelope. The building where you worked? I bought it, not to control you, but because Tony fired you for something that was my fault. There's a management position waiting. Full benefits, a salary that will let you breathe. No strings attached. He set the envelope on her coffee table. And I'm starting a foundation called Carter's Hope Foundation to help single parents rebuild their lives. Because your daughter taught me that dreams matter, and you taught me what real courage looks like. Rachel stared at the envelope, overwhelmed. This feels like too much, like you're trying to fix everything with money. I'm trying to honor what you gave me, Andrew said quietly. You saw me as human when I had nothing to offer. Let me give you back the choice to dream again. At the door, he paused. Take time to decide what you want, Rachel. I'll respect whatever that is. After he left, Rachel opened the envelope with trembling hands. Inside was not just a job offer, but a handwritten note. Your kindness saved me. Now let me help save your dreams. All my love, Andrew. Weeks passed before Rachel called him. When she did, it was to say yes, not just to the job, but to the possibility of building something beautiful together. As Rachel looked around their bookstore cafe on opening day, watching Andrew read a story to a group of children, including Emma, she remembered that first moment in the diner. She had offered him coffee, not knowing she was really offering him hope. In return, he had given her a future she never dared to dream. The small act of kindness that started it all, a cup of coffee and a warm smile, had indeed changed everything. Not because of the money or the fairy tale ending, but because it proved that love grows best in the soil of genuine compassion, regardless of who's watching or what reward might follow. Sometimes, the greatest wealth isn't what we have. It's who we choose to be when no one's looking. If this story touched you, please like, subscribe, and share your own stories of unexpected kindness below.